I sat alone at my kitchen table on my 28th birthday, picking at takeout Chinese food with plastic chopsticks. Through my apartment window, I could see cars lined up outside my childhood home next door. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom saying they were too tired for birthday dinner tonight. But I could hear laughter and music drifting from their backyard. Something twisted in my stomach as I walked to the fence and peered over. There was my entire extended family, celebrating my younger brother Jameis' recent job promotion. On my birthday, the realization hit like ice water. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. This wasn't just forgetting my birthday. This was deliberate. As I watched my aunts, uncles, and cousins raising glasses to James, memories flooded back. The car I saved for 3 years, that suddenly went to James when he turned 18. My parents paying his full college tuition while I worked double shifts at a diner and took out student loans. Family vacations planned around his baseball schedule. Never mind that I had dance recitals or academic competitions. It always told myself it was coincidence. James was the baby. James needed more help. James had potential. But sitting here eating cold lo mein while they celebrated him on my birthday, I finally saw the pattern for what it was. The next morning, I marched over to confront them. Mom was in her bathrobe, casually sipping coffee like nothing had happened. "Oh, Alfreda, honey, good morning," she said without looking up from her phone. "Did you forget something yesterday, Mom?" She glanced up with that innocent expression I'd seen 1,000 times. "I don't think so. Was there something important?" "My birthday. You know, the day you gave birth to me 28 years ago." Dad walked in, already dressed for work. "Oh, right. Happy belated birthday, sweetheart. Sorry, we were just so exhausted from planning Jameis' celebration. You understand." Before I could respond, James strolled through the front door with his fiancée, Jessica. He had a key, of course. Had moved out 2 years ago, but still treated this place like his personal hotel. "Morning, family," he announced, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. "Jessica and I have some exciting news to share." Jessica, a petite blonde with perfectly manicured nails, smiled that pageant, queen smile I'd learned to distrust. "We've set a wedding date for this fall." Mom clapped her hands together. "Oh, how wonderful. We should start planning immediately." Then Dad turned to me with an expression I should have recognized as calculated. "Alfreda, you're so good at organizing things. And honestly, you make more money than any of us expected when you started that marketing business. We were hoping you could help plan the wedding, maybe even contribute to the costs." My mouth fell open. "Contribute to the costs?" "Well, you're doing so well for yourself," Mom chimed in. "We've been telling everyone how successful you've become. And James deserves a beautiful wedding, don't you think?" James nodded like this was perfectly reasonable. I always knew my big sister would take care of everything when the time came. "You've got those industry connections, right? Maybe you could get us some deals on venues and catering." Jessica examined her nails. "I was thinking something elegant. Maybe 20,000 for the reception?" "Nothing too extravagant, but we want it to be memorable." $20,000. They wanted me to pay $20,000 for a wedding reception after they'd forgotten my birthday to celebrate his job promotion. "How do you even know how much money I make?" I asked. Mom and Dad exchanged a glance. "We just want what's best for James," Dad said. "You've always been the responsible one, the one who takes care of things." Something cold settled in my chest. The way they said it, like I was a resource to be utilized rather than a daughter to be loved. But I found myself nodding. "Of course," I heard myself say. "I'll help with the wedding." The relief on their faces was immediate and telling. They'd been worried I might say no, which meant they knew exactly how unreasonable this request was. "Wonderful," Jessica clapped. "I have so many ideas. This is going to be perfect." As they chattered about venues and flowers, I studied their faces. My parents looked smug, like they'd successfully manipulated me again. James looked entitled, like this was his due. Jessica looked calculating, already spending money that wasn't hers. "I'll need to see all the financial information," I said quietly, "to properly budget for everything." "Of course, sweetheart," Dad said. "Whatever you need." They had no idea what I actually needed, but they were about to find out. I spent the next week playing the helpful sister role while conducting my own investigation. Every time they asked about wedding planning progress, I had updates ready, venue options researched, caterer recommendations compiled, guest list estimates calculated. They praised my efficiency, never suspecting I was gathering intelligence for an entirely different purpose. The financial records told a disturbing story. I'd asked for bank statements and tax documents to properly budget the wedding expenses, and my parents handed them over without hesitation. Too much hesitation would have been suspicious, but their eagerness was worse. They wanted me to see their finances because they thought it would pressure me into contributing more. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Late Tuesday evening, I sat in my apartment with documents spread across my dining table. My laptop screen showed credit monitoring websites and financial databases I'd accessed for wedding planning research. The picture emerging made my hands shake. 3 credit cards I'd never applied for appeared on my credit report. Cards in my name, with my social security number, showing balances totaling $15,000. The addresses on the accounts were my parents' house. The spending patterns showed gas stations, grocery stores, and cash advances dating back 3 years. My parents had been using my identity to fund their lifestyle. I dug deeper, my marketing research skills serving me well in this darker application. Email records from my old family computer showed conversations between my parents about credit limits and minimum payments. Messages that made my stomach turn. Alfreda won't notice if we keep the payments current. Dad had written to Mom 2 years ago. She never checks her credit score. Just make sure we don't max them out. Mom had replied. We need to keep her credit good in case we need more later. More later. They'd been planning to expand this fraud, but the credit cards were just the beginning. Tax records showed they'd been claiming me as a dependent for the past 3 years, despite the fact that I'd been financially independent since college. They'd been collecting tax refunds based on having a dependent, while I paid full taxes as a single person with no dependents. The math was staggering. Between the fraudulent tax refunds and the stolen credit, they'd taken nearly $25,000 from me over 3 years, money they'd used to fund Jameis' car payments, his security deposit when he moved out, and apparently a steady stream of allowances that kept him comfortable while he hopped through his early 20s. James knew. The email evidence made that clear. Messages between him and Dad discussing Alfreda's contribution to the family and jokes about me being too focused on work to notice the family finances. They'd been laughing about stealing from me. My phone rang, breaking through my furious research haze. Mom's voice was cheerful when I answered. Hi, honey. Just checking on the wedding planning. How are those venue tours going? I looked at the evidence of their crimes spread across my table. Great, Mom. I'm learning so much about how money flows in families. It's really eye-opening. Oh, wonderful. Jessica is so excited. She keeps saying what a blessing it is to have you handling everything. A blessing. They thought defrauding me was a blessing. Mom, I'm going to need access to the joint account Dad mentioned, the one you use for family expenses, for wedding budget planning. Of course, dear. I'll text you the login information. She was so confident in their deception that she didn't hesitate to give me access to more financial records. Within an hour, I had complete visibility into their money management. That's when I discovered the second mortgage. My parents had taken out a second mortgage on their house 18 months ago. The loan application listed me as a co-signer, complete with my forged signature and employment information they'd somehow obtained from my business clients. They'd used my income and credit score to qualify for a loan I knew nothing about, $60,000. They'd borrowed $60,000 against their house using my identity. And based on the account activity, James had been receiving regular transfers from that money. His job promotion celebration had been funded by money stolen in my name. I sat back in my chair, understanding finally why they'd been so eager for me to help with the wedding. They needed me complicit in money movement, making me look like a willing participant in what was actually an elaborate financial fraud scheme. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd given me access to everything, thinking I was too trusting and grateful for their attention to question their motives. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I opened a new browser window and began documenting everything with screenshots and saved files. If they wanted to play financial games with my life, I'd show them what a real strategic mind could accomplish. The wedding planning was about to become much more interesting. My investigation expanded beyond my own family's finances when I met with Jessica's parents the following Saturday. The Hendersons had invited me to brunch at their country club to discuss wedding arrangements and get to know each other better. I'd agreed, thinking it was another tedious family obligation. Instead, It became the most revealing conversation of my life. Patricia Henderson was exactly what Id expected from Jessica's mother. Perfectly styled silver hair, designer jewelry, and the kind of casual condescension that came from old money. Robert Henderson seemed more genuine, but I could see where Jessica had learned to manipulate wealthy people. "We're so pleased James is marrying into such a successful family," Patricia said over mimosas. "Your parents speak so highly of your business accomplishments." I nearly choked on my orange juice. "My parents talk about my business." "Oh yes, they've been telling everyone about your marketing consultancy and your real estate investments. They mentioned you own several properties." "Real estate investments. Properties. I owned exactly 0 real estate beyond my lease agreement." "I think there might be some confusion," I said carefully. "I don't own any properties." Robert frowned. "That's strange. Your father mentioned you'd inherited your grandmother's house and had been expanding from there. He said you were quite the entrepreneur." "My grandmother's house. The house that had supposedly been left equally to James and me, but which I'd never seen any paperwork for. The house my parents claimed was too complicated for me to worry about." "Can you tell me exactly what my parents said about my real estate situation?" Patricia looked uncomfortable. "Well, they said you'd been so successful that you were helping fund Jameis' lifestyle while he established his career. They made it sound like you were quite generous with family financial support. They'd been telling Jessica's wealthy parents that I was bankrolling James, making it seem like our family had money and connections we didn't actually possess. The Hendersons were allowing this marriage because they thought they were allying with another affluent family." "Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you something important. How much money have you given my parents for wedding expenses?" The look she exchanged with her husband told me everything. $50,000, Robert said quietly. "As a wedding gift, to help them get started. Your parents said it would be matched by your contribution, making it a $100,000 wedding fund." $50,000. My parents had scammed Jessica's family out of $50,000 by promising I'd match it, money that had probably already been transferred into accounts I was supposedly helping to manage. "I never agreed to contribute $50,000, I said. "In fact, I never agreed to any specific amount." Patricia's face went pale. "Are you saying your parents misrepresented your financial involvement?" Before I could answer, Jessica appeared at our table, breathless and slightly panicked. She'd clearly been watching from across the restaurant. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the empty chair. Traffic was terrible, but I'd seen her car in the parking lot when it arrived 30 minutes ago. She'd been watching this conversation, probably trying to decide whether to interrupt. "We were just discussing the wedding budget," I said, watching her face carefully. "Your parents mentioned the generous gift they've provided." Jessica's smile was too bright. "Oh yes, they've been so wonderful. James and I are so grateful. It's interesting," I continued, "because I've been handling all the financial planning, and I don't have any record of receiving their contribution. I'm wondering if there might be some confusion about account management." Jessica's eyes darted between her parents and me. "Maybe we should discuss this privately." "Actually, I think we should discuss it right here," I said, "because I'm discovering some very concerning discrepancies in the wedding planning process." That's when Jessica made her fatal mistake. "Look, Alfreda, I know this is complicated, but there are things about this situation that you don't understand. Maybe we could talk later, just the two of us? I could even, compensate you for your time and discretion. Say, $5,000. She was trying to bribe me, in front of her parents, to hide something about the wedding that was worth paying me to keep quiet." Patricia Henderson's voice was ice cold. "Jessica Marie Henderson, what exactly are you trying to keep quiet about our family's money?" Jessica's face went white. "Mom, it's not what you think." "Then, explain it," Robert demanded. "Explain why you're offering to pay Jameis' sister to hide information about our wedding gift." The silence stretched until I decided to push the conversation where it needed to go. "Jessica, is there something about this marriage that your parents should know? Something that might affect the legal validity of their financial gift?" She looked like a trapped animal. "I don't know what you mean." "I mean, is this actually your first marriage?" The words hung in the air like a bomb. Jessica's parents stared at her, then at me, then back at her. "What exactly are you implying?" Patricia whispered. "I'm asking Jessica directly if she's currently married to someone else." Jessica stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. "I don't have to listen to these accusations. Sit down." Robert's voice was granite. "Sit down right now and answer the question." Jessica remained standing, but tears started flowing. "It's complicated." "Complicated how?" Patricia's voice was deadly quiet. "There was this guy in college, David. He needed help with immigration status. And I was young and stupid, and I thought I was helping someone I cared about. We got married for his green card application, but it was supposed to be temporary. The confession tumbled out in a rush. We never lived together. It wasn't a real marriage. But we never got divorced because his immigration case is still pending and it would complicate everything. The lawyer said it was better to wait until his status was finalized." Robert Henderson looked like he might have a heart attack. "You're telling us that our daughter is committing marriage fraud." "It's not fraud," Jessica protested. "David and I were really together. We just got married for practical reasons. And you're still married to him while planning a wedding to James?" I asked. "The plan was to get divorced right after David's citizenship came through. Then James and I could get married legally. But David's case got delayed, and James proposed, and I panicked because I didn't want to lose him." Patricia was staring at her daughter like she'd never seen her before. "So you decided to commit bigamy?" "Using our money to fund an illegal wedding. It's not bigamy if the first marriage wasn't real," Jessica said desperately. "A legal marriage certificate says it's real regardless of your feelings." I pointed out, "And your trust fund probably has legitimacy requirements for marriage." "Doesn't it?" Jessica's silence was answer enough. She wasn't just committing marriage fraud. She was planning to defraud her own trust fund by claiming benefits for a marriage that would be legally invalid. Robert Henderson stood up and pulled out his phone. "I'm calling our attorney right now. Jessica, you and I are going to have a very serious conversation about the legal implications of what you've just confessed." As they left the restaurant in tense silence, I sat alone at the table, processing what I'd just learned. My parents weren't just stealing from me. They were part of a web of fraud that involved multiple families and possibly federal crimes. The wedding planning was about to become much more complicated than any of them had anticipated. The county clerk's office smelled like old paper and broken dreams, but I'd never been happier to spend a Tuesday morning in a government building. I'd told my parents I was researching marriage license requirements for James and Jessica, which was technically true. I just hadn't mentioned I was also investigating property records for a completely different purpose. My grandmother's house had been the foundation of my childhood security. Grandma Rose had always promised that the house would belong to both James and me when she passed, giving us each a place to start our adult lives. When she died 4 years ago, my parents handled all the estate paperwork while I was busy launching my marketing business. They'd told me the house was being held in trust until we were both 30. Something about tax implications and responsible ownership. I'd believed them. Why wouldn't I? The property records told a different story. According to the county database, the house had been transferred directly to James 3 months after Grandma's death. No trust, no waiting period, no shared ownership, just a simple quit-claim deed showing full ownership transferred to James Robert Patterson, my 24-year-old brother who'd never paid rent or utilities in his life. My name appeared on exactly one document, a quit-claim deed dated 6 months after Grandma's funeral, showing that I had voluntarily surrendered any claim to the property to my beloved brother James. The signature looked like mine. The notary stamp looked official, but I'd never seen this document before in my life. "Can you tell me about the notary requirements for property transfers?" I asked the clerk. A tired-looking woman named Helen who'd probably seen every type of fraud imaginable. "Both parties have to appear in person with valid identification," she said. "The notary has to witness the actual signing and verify the signatures match the IDs. What happens if someone forges a signature on a quitclaim deed?" Helen's expression sharpened. "That would be fraud. A felony. Why do you ask?" I showed her my driver's license and the quitclaim deed. "Because I never signed this document, and I'd like to know what my legal options are." She examined the paperwork carefully, then looked up at my ID again. "Honey, if you didn't sign this, you need to contact the district attorney's office immediately. This represents a significant financial crime. The house was worth $400,000. By forging my signature, my parents had stolen my inheritance worth $200,000. But the financial theft was just the beginning of the betrayal. Helen helped me access additional records. The house had been generating rental income for 3 years from a basement apartment I'd never known existed. $1,500 per month, collected by something called Patterson Family Management LLC, an entity that, according to business registration records, was owned jointly by my parents and James. They'd been collecting $18,000 per year in rental income from my stolen inheritance, while I paid $1,200 a month for my apartment 6 blocks away. But the most devastating discovery was tucked into the estate file. A letter from Grandma's attorney, dated 2 weeks after her funeral. A letter addressed to me personally, explaining that I needed to contact his office within 60 days to complete inheritance paperwork. A letter I'd never received. "We sent this certified mail to your address," the attorney's notes indicated. No response received. Attempted follow-up calls to phone number on file, but calls were not returned. My parents had intercepted my mail and ignored the attorney's calls. They'd let the 60-day period expire, then used legal technicalities to claim I'd abandoned my inheritance rights. That's when they'd forged the quit-claim deed to make the theft look legitimate. I photographed every document with my phone, building a case file that was growing more damning by the hour. Tax records showed that James had been claiming homeowner tax deductions for 3 years, while my parents collected the rental income. They'd structured the fraud to benefit everyone except the person they'd stolen from. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "How's the marriage license research going? Jessica's parents are asking about timeline for the ceremony." I stared at the message, understanding now that every question about my wedding planning progress was really them checking to see if I'd discovered their crimes. They were nervous, probably wondering how long they could keep me distracted with fake tasks while they prepared for whatever their endgame actually was. Another message appeared, this one from James. "Hey sis, thanks again for handling all this wedding stuff. You're the best. By the way, I might need some help with paperwork for refinancing my house next month. Could you co-sign some documents?" Refinancing his house, the house he'd stolen from me, using my credit again to extract more money from my forged inheritance. They weren't just criminals. They were incompetent criminals who thought I was too stupid to figure out their schemes. I drove to the house that should have been half mine, parking across the street like I was casing it for burglary. It looked exactly the same as when Grandma lived there, except for the separate entrance that had been added to the basement. A small sign by the side door read, "Apartment for rent, contact Patterson Management." A young woman emerged from the basement entrance, heading to her car with a laptop bag and coffee mug. She looked like a graduate student, probably paying $1,500 a month to live in the basement of my stolen inheritance, while my parents, brother, and his criminal fiancé planned to use my money to fund their escape from consequences. But I was done being a victim. It was time to start planning some consequences of my own. I pulled out my phone and called the number on my business cards. Time to use my professional skills for personal justice. Marcus Chen's office, FBI Financial Crimes Division. "How can I help you?" Marcus, my college boyfriend who'd become a federal investigator. The one person who might actually understand the scope of what my family had done to me. Marcus, it's Alfreda Patterson. I need to report a federal crime. Multiple federal crimes, actually. And I think you're going to want to hear this story. Marcus met me at a coffee shop downtown 3 days later, looking every inch the federal investigator had become since our college days. Suited, serious, but still with those kind eyes that had made me trust him when we were 21 and figuring out our lives together. We'd broken up amicably when his FBI training program required him to relocate, but we'd stayed friends through social media and occasional texts. "Alfreda, you look good," he said, settling into the booth across from me. "Though you sounded stressed on the phone." Financial crimes against family members are unfortunately more common than people realize. I'd brought copies of everything: bank statements, forged documents, tax records, email evidence, property transfers. The complete picture of my family's criminal enterprise laid out in organized folders that impressed even Marcus. "This is comprehensive," he said, flipping through the evidence. "You've documented everything perfectly, but I have to tell you, this case is bigger than just your family." My coffee went cold, as he explained. The Patterson family name had appeared in his investigation 6 months ago, connected to a broader identity theft and money laundering operation targeting multiple families in our area. My parents weren't just stealing from me. They were part of a network that had defrauded dozens of victims over the past 5 years. "We've been building cases against the entire operation," Marcus said. "Your parents were suspected participants, but we didn't have enough evidence to move forward. This documentation you've gathered could be the key to shutting down the entire network. He showed me photos on his phone. Other families, other victims. Jameis' previous girlfriend, Sarah Martinez, whose parents had been scammed out of $30,000 in a fake investment scheme my parents had promoted. An elderly couple from our neighborhood who'd lost their retirement savings to fraudulent renovation contracts my family had facilitated. The pattern is sophisticated, Marcus explained. They build relationships with victims over months or years, then exploit those relationships when people are vulnerable. Weddings, funerals, medical emergencies, times when families make large financial decisions quickly. Like Jessica's parents contributing $50,000 for a wedding, I said. Exactly. And we believe your brother's wedding is actually the exit strategy. Based on our investigation, we think they're planning to take whatever money they can extract from this situation and disappear permanently. The room felt like it was spinning. Disappear how? Marcus pulled out a tablet and showed me airline records. Your parents purchased one-way tickets to a non-extradition country. Departure date is 3 days after the wedding. They've also been liquidating assets and transferring money to offshore accounts. They were going to steal everything they could from Jessica's family, use the wedding as their final scam, then flee the country while leaving James to face the consequences. Or maybe James was planning to disappear with them, leaving Jessica to deal with the legal aftermath of their marriage fraud. What do you need from me? I asked. We need you to continue playing along until the wedding, Marcus said. We need them to complete the fraud so we can arrest them with evidence of the full crime. But Alfreda, this means you'll have to watch them steal from more people while building our case. The weight of it settled on my shoulders. I had the power to stop my parents from stealing $50,000 from Jessica's family, but doing so would let them escape justice for the years of fraud they'd already committed against other victims. How many families have they hurt? I asked. At least 12 that we can prove. Probably more. Total damages approaching $500,000. $500,000 stolen from families like the Martinez family, from elderly couples, from people who'd trusted my parents enough to give them access to their finances, people who'd been victimized the same way I had, except they didn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back. I'll do it, I said. I'll help you catch them. But I want to add something to the plan. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? I want to expose everything at the wedding, in front of all the guests, including the families they've defrauded. I want them to face their victims before they face a judge. That's not how federal arrests usually work, Marcus said carefully, but it's how justice should work. These people deserve to see their attackers held accountable. And my family deserves to have their crimes exposed in front of everyone who believed their lies. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. This would be dangerous for you. If they realize you're working with law enforcement, they might become desperate. Desperate criminals make unpredictable choices. They've been stealing my life for 3 years, I said. They stole my inheritance, my credit, my reputation, and my family relationships. I'm already living with the consequences of their crimes. Now I want them to live with consequences too. He nodded slowly. Let me talk to my supervisor about incorporating a public exposure into the arrest plan. But Alfreda, once we do this, there's no going back. Your family relationships will be permanently destroyed. I thought about sitting alone on my birthday while they celebrated James. About years of being treated like a resource instead of a daughter. About the rental income collected from my stolen house while I struggled to pay rent. My family relationships were destroyed the moment they decided to steal from me, I said. I'm just returning the favor. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, you're being incredibly brave. Most people wouldn't have the strength to fight back against their own family. Most people don't discover their entire family is a criminal enterprise, I replied. But I'm going to make sure they pay for every dollar they've stolen and every life they've ruined. We spent the next hour planning the details, how to document the final stages of their fraud, how to coordinate with other victims, how to ensure the wedding reception became a courthouse instead of a celebration. By the time I left that coffee shop, I knew exactly what gift I was going to give my brother on his wedding day. It was going to be the truth, wrapped in handcuffs and delivered by federal agents. They wanted a memorable wedding. I was going to give them one they'd never forget. The wedding day arrived with perfect October weather and absolutely no hint of the chaos about to unfold. I'd spent 2 weeks playing the devoted sister flawlessly, confirming vendor arrangements, coordinating guest logistics, and reassuring everyone that every detail was handled perfectly. My performance had been so convincing that even I was impressed with my acting abilities. The venue was the country club where Eid first learned about Jessica's marriage fraud, which felt like poetic justice. 200 guests filled the elegant ballroom, including several families I now knew had been victimized by my parents' schemes. Marcus had ensured that key witnesses were strategically positioned throughout the crowd, along with federal agents disguised as waitstaff and photographers. I stood at the altar in my maid of honor dress, watching James fidget with his tie while Jessica walked down the aisle in her $4,000 dress. A dress paid for with stolen money, worn by a woman already married to someone else, in a ceremony designed to defraud her family's trust fund. The irony was overwhelming. The ceremony proceeded normally until the minister reached the critical moment. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. That was my cue. Actually, I have something to say, I announced, stepping forward from my position beside Jessica. Something everyone here needs to hear. The crowd murmured with confusion. James looked panicked. My parents, seated in the front row, had expressions of growing horror as they realized I wasn't following their script anymore. This wedding cannot legally proceed because the bride is already married, I said clearly, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. Jessica's face went white. Alfreda, what are you doing? I'm telling the truth, Jessica, something this family apparently struggles with. I pulled out my phone and activated the presentation Eid prepared. Everyone, please direct your attention to the screens around the room. The country club's audiovisual system, which Id had installed under the guise of showing wedding photos, now displayed Jessica's marriage certificate to David Morrison, dated 3 years ago. Official documents showing her current legal marital status. Jessica Henderson is already married and has been for 3 years, I announced. This ceremony is an attempt to commit bigamy and defraud her family's trust fund, which requires legitimate marriage for access. The Hendersons looked devastated. James looked confused. My parents looked murderous. But that's not the only fraud happening here today, I continued, because this wedding was planned and funded using money stolen through a sophisticated identity theft operation run by my parents and brother. The screens changed to show bank records, credit reports, and property documents. Evidence of years of financial crimes laid out in clear, undeniable detail. Linda and Paul Patterson have been using my identity to steal money for 3 years. They've forged my signature on property transfers, taken out credit cards and loans in my name, and filed fraudulent tax returns claiming me as a dependent while I paid full taxes independently. I could see recognition dawning on faces throughout the crowd. Several of the older guests were reaching for their phones, probably calling lawyers they should have contacted years ago. They've also been running investment scams, renovation frauds, and other financial schemes that have victimized at least 12 families in our community. Total damages approaching $500,000. The screens now showed a list of victims, including several families present at the wedding. The Martinez family, whose daughter had dated James. The elderly Thompsons, who'd lost their retirement savings. The young Williams couple, who'd been scammed out of their down payment money. James has been knowingly receiving money stolen from these families, including $18,000 per year in rental income from my grandmother's house, which he obtained through forged property transfers. James tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Alfreda, this is crazy. You're ruining my wedding. I'm not ruining your wedding, James. I'm stopping a crime. Because this entire event was designed as the final phase of a money laundering operation that was supposed to end with Mom and Dad fleeing the country with Jessica's family's money. I showed the airline tickets, the offshore bank accounts, and the asset liquidation records Marcus had helped me access. They were planning to steal everything they could today, then disappear forever, leaving you and Jessica to face the legal consequences of marriage fraud. While they lived comfortably in a non-extradition country, the silence in the ballroom was deafening. Then Patricia Henderson stood up. Officers, she called out. I believe we're ready for those arrests now. That's when the federal agents revealed themselves, emerging from their positions throughout the crowd with badges and handcuffs. Marcus approached the altar with backup, reading my parents their rights as 200 wedding guests watched in stunned silence. Linda Patterson, Paul Patterson, and James Patterson. You're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit federal crimes. My parents tried to run, but found their path blocked by agents. James collapsed into a chair, finally understanding that his entire lifestyle had been built on criminal activity. Jessica stood frozen in her wedding dress, probably calculating whether she could claim ignorance about the fraud. Jessica Henderson, Marcus continued. You're also under arrest for marriage fraud, conspiracy to commit trust fund fraud, and accessory to money laundering. As they were led away in handcuffs, I picked up the microphone the minister had been using. For everyone here who's been victimized by the Patterson family's crimes, federal agents will be available to take your statements and help you pursue restitution. This investigation has been ongoing for months, and today's arrests represent justice for all the families they've hurt. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some guests were crying, others were angry. Several families were gathering around the federal agents, finally able to report crimes they'd suspected but couldn't prove. I stood in the middle of it all, still wearing my maid of honor dress, finally feeling like I could breathe freely for the first time in years. My family was gone, but they'd been criminals disguised as family members. What I'd lost wasn't love. It was an illusion that had been poisoning my life. Marcus appeared at my side as the handcuffed prisoners were led away. Are you okay? I'm perfect, I said, and meant it. For the first time in my adult life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The wedding was over, but my real life was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the living room of my grandmother's house, finally reclaimed through federal court proceedings. Watching the sun stream through windows, I'd cleaned myself. The house felt like Grandma again, warm and welcoming and full of possibility. I'd spent months restoring it, erasing every trace of my family's criminal occupancy and turning it back into the home my grandmother had intended. The basement apartment had been converted into office space for the Victim Advocacy Center I'd established, with the restitution money recovered from my family's crimes. The Patterson Family Fraud Recovery Center helped other families navigate the legal and emotional aftermath of financial crimes committed by trusted relatives. WED already assisted 43 families, and our success rate for recovering stolen assets was approaching 70%. Marcus knocked on the front door precisely at 6, as he had every Friday evening for the past 3 months. We'd been taking our renewed relationship slowly, building something based on mutual respect and shared values, rather than the desperate college romance we'd shared years ago. How was your day? He asked, kissing my cheek as he came inside. Productive. We had 3 new families contact us about inheritance fraud, and we recovered another $22,000 for the Williams family. Oh, and I got a letter from James. Marcus' expression tightened. What did he want? I handed him the letter I'd received that morning. James had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple fraud charges. His letter was 3 pages of genuine remorse and accountability, acknowledging the harm Head caused and the years of criminal behavior Head ignored because it benefited him. He's different, I said. Prison therapy has helped him understand how destructive our family dynamic was. He's actually taking responsibility for his choices instead of blaming circumstances. Are you going to respond? Maybe eventually. He deserves credit for genuine change, but I'm not ready to rebuild that relationship yet. He needs to prove his transformation through actions over years, not just words and letters. My parents had received longer sentences and shown no remorse whatsoever. They were appealing their convictions and maintaining their innocence despite overwhelming evidence. I'd blocked their attempts to contact me and had no intention of ever speaking to them again. Jessica had received 3 years for marriage fraud and had been deported back to Canada after serving her sentence. Her marriage to David had been annulled. Her trust fund had been frozen pending investigation, and her parents had disowned her completely. Sometimes consequences were exactly what people deserved. I have some good news, Marcus said, settling onto the couch beside me. The task force recovered another $130,000 in offshore accounts. The restitution fund is now fully funded to compensate all verified victims. Every family my parents had defrauded would be made financially whole. It wouldn't erase the emotional trauma of being betrayed by people they'd trusted, but it would restore their financial security and give them resources to rebuild their lives. There's something else, Marcus continued. The Martinez family sent a thank you card. Their daughter Sarah is graduating from medical school next month, and they wanted you to know that recovering their stolen money made it possible for her to finish her education. I'd never met Sarah Martinez, but I knew her story. My parents had convinced her family to invest their college fund in a fake real estate development project, then disappeared with their money when James broke up with her. Without that money, she'd been forced to drop out of school and work full-time for 2 years before she could afford to re-enroll. She's going to be a pediatric oncologist, I said. All because we held my family accountable for their crimes. All because you were brave enough to sacrifice your family relationships to protect other families from being victimized. I leaned into his warmth, grateful for the life I'd built from the ashes of my family's betrayal. The advocacy center was thriving. My business was more successful than ever, and I'd found love with someone who valued my strength and intelligence rather than trying to exploit them. I've been thinking about hosting a recovery celebration here next month, I said, inviting all the families we've helped, letting them meet each other and share their stories, turning this house into a place of healing instead of theft. That sounds perfect. Your grandmother would be proud of what you've done with her gift. I'd found her final letter to me tucked inside an old recipe box, explaining that she'd left me the house because she knew I had the strength to overcome whatever challenges our family dynamic might create. She'd seen the dysfunction even then and had given me the tools to escape it, trusting that I'd be wise enough to use them when the time came. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I opened it to find Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman whose retirement money my parents had stolen, holding a covered casserole dish and wearing a bright smile. "I brought dinner," she announced. "My way of saying thank you for getting our money back and for everything your center is doing for families like mine." She'd become a regular volunteer at the Advocacy Center, helping other elderly victims understand their legal options and providing emotional support during their recovery process. Watching her transform from a devastated fraud victim into a fierce advocate for others had been one of the most rewarding aspects of my work. As we sat around my grandmother's dining table sharing Mrs. Thompson's famous lasagna, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Losing my birth family had led to finding my chosen family. Being betrayed by people who were supposed to love me had taught me to recognize and appreciate genuine love when I found it. "You know, Mrs. Thompson said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, "when your parents stole our money, I thought my life was over. I didn't know how we'd survive on Social Security alone. But meeting you and seeing how you turned your pain into purpose has taught me that sometimes the worst things that happen to us create opportunities for the best things." She was right. If my family hadn't been criminals, I never would have developed the skills to help other victims. If they hadn't stolen from me, I wouldn't have learned to value relationships based on genuine care rather than obligation. If they hadn't betrayed me, I wouldn't have discovered my own strength. Before you go, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? How did you handle a situation where people you trusted betrayed that trust? Share your story in the comments below because your experience might help someone else who's facing a similar situation. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video to help it reach others who might need to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations, and share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing they're not alone in family struggles. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to walk away from people who don't value us. You deserve relationships built on respect, honesty, and genuine love.